suicide, so if you need to leave, I completely understand. This is a very difficult issue that impacts a lot of people in a very personal way. Gun violence is a multifaceted issue that affects a growing number of Americans. Today I'm going to expand on an issue with which gun violence has had an incredible connection: suicide. From data collected by the Centers for Disease Control from 2012 to 2016, there has been an average of over 35,000 gun deaths annually, which amounts to a daily average of 96. Now, obviously, this doesn't happen in such an ordered way. However, an average of gun-related deaths in the United States amounting to nearly 100 is astounding and frankly terrifies me. Breaking this down further, the largest category of gun-related deaths is suicide. The daily average of gun suicides reaches 59, whilst homicides amount to 35. The annual average of gun suicides is over 21,000, while the annual average of homicides is over 12,000. I'm not trying to downplay gun homicides in America. I am merely trying to put into perspective one portion of gun violence that is dangerously overlooked. Sadly, suicide has been on the rise in America, and I have seen it touch the lives around me firsthand. When we look at people who choose suicide, we can begin to break down those that end up living after their attempt and those that die. Again, from the Centers of Disease Control, approximately 90% of attempted suicides with guns are fatal. Only about 10% of people live after an attempted suicide using a gun. This is almost perfectly indirect to any other method of suicide. Those that attempt suicide by a method other than guns have an approximate 90% survival rate and a 10% fatality rate. These facts include veterans. 2/3 of our veteran suicides are by guns. And revisiting the fatality point I mentioned earlier, this is detrimental because there is only a 10% survival rate. Guns may not be the most widely used method of attempting suicide, however, they are the most fatal. Many people who attempt suicide spend 10 minutes or less deciding before making an attempt. 70% of people who survive a suicide attempt never attempt to suicide again. If 90% of gun suicides result in fatalities, only 10% survive, and out of those 10%, 70% will never commit suicide again. Guns give no second chances. Guns are the most fatal method of suicide, and this is silently sweeping the nation, but we need to talk about this and bring it into the spotlight. Gun control is not just about decreasing homicides and protecting people from others. It's also about protecting people from themselves. Slightly less than half of child suicides are by gun, but 80% of those guns used belong to family members. More than 1/3 of U.S. children live in a gun-owning household, and only half of those families reported that their firearms were locked away. Household gun access has been shown to triple the risk of death by suicide, and variants of suicide rates across states and regions are primarily due to gun access, not differences in mental illnesses. Common sense gun laws can drastically reduce these horrific statistics by promoting safe storage of firearms. Communities can come together to create safe storage policies and training for families who own guns to attend and learn about how to store their guns in the safest way possible. Something Connecticut already has in place is an extreme risk protection order, where our local law enforcement and family members can petition to have a loved one's firearms temporarily removed if they might pose a risk to themselves or others. Another critical point is background checks every single time an individual wants to buy a gun. I cannot stress how important this is. There should be absolutely no place in America where anyone can buy a firearm in less than 5 minutes where no records are kept. If you are a responsible gun owner, there should be no issue with background checks because they are in place to protect you and others, not to take your firearms. Thank you for letting me speak on an issue that impacts my life, and thank you for listening to me today. I stand here for every person who has lost their life to gun violence and gun suicide. Remember, this is just one side of gun violence, and only one part of the reason we are here today. Please research every bit of knowledge you can get to understand the enormity of gun violence and how complex it is. Thank you.